updates. And something that really has stood out for me, I've worked for many years as an advisor to various CEOs and leaders, and his biggest message and mantra for everyone has been about how New York is tough, smart, united, disciplined, and loving. And he ends every one of his updates with that. And what it really reinforces, for us in Brooklyn, especially, where it's extremely densely populated, and I can't walk more than like 5 feet without passing 4 or 5 people on the street. We put our masks on, not to protect me, but to protect you. And there's a thing about, if each individual takes up their own rights of leadership and says, okay, I'm going to lead by example and go out there and do something because I'm trying to do the greater good for the company, the community, for my school, the organizations that I'm working with. There is a mindfulness, a heartfulness, and also a compassionate way that we can really dive forward. And so that's one of the big things that kept coming up for me, at least in the conversations this week around this. And then, of course, going back to the protests as well, which have so many different things which we'll touch base on and talk about. But most of the protesters had their masks on, and there was this kind of duality between this massive movement that has to happen and needs leadership in all sorts of ways, and people coming out and standing up and saying, yes, I believe in it, but then also saying, oh, and by the way, I don't want you to get sick while we have this conversation. So that for me has been part of it. But Sunil has some really good stories too, and we'll let you start a little bit, just in case I get cut off again.
No, I think we all got, there was a slight interruption, maybe some kind of sunspot, or maybe the Saharan dust storm. I'm not sure what's going on. But good day to all of you, and it's really a pleasure to be with you all. And it's the heartful leadership I can talk a lot about, but then the compassion really threw me for a loop, because the word compassion has got a very interesting meaning. And if you look at the definitions, they all lead towards some more empathetic. There's a softness of sorts that comes into play. But if you look at the world of business, or if you look at the world of anything else, there's a toughness there too. So the question is, how do these coexist? And this reminds me of, we were flying, my wife and I were flying back. I live in Mexico now, and we were flying back through Houston. And in the lounge, we met a lady who was a yoga student in my wife's yoga studio, and they got chatting, and I was overhearing the conversation. And she was complaining about the Mexican government, blah, blah, blee, blee, and why they are not doing certain things. And she'd, if the narco guys, stood for power, she'd vote for them because they were much more integrated, compassionate, and there was a goodness there. Now you can look at the drug lords and the drug dealerships and that whole clan. But imagine finding compassion in that environment. Many times you don't even think about compassion. So compassion can actually spread, can span multiple layers, and sometimes, just with time, because these guys, they take care of their own. They take care of their tribes, the community, and obviously there's an ulterior motive for that protection. But compassion can be very, very profitable. So that's just a way of looking at this, the same term. And if you look at Colombia, the whole experience in Medellin, I mean, there used to be this guy, Pablo Escobar, who was, again, a drug, I mean, he's quite famous, but now if you go to Medellin, it's a beautiful story. And a number of the mayors from Mexico and other places go to Medellin to see the transformation that happens. So again, I think there's many, many crisis moments, many things are happening. And sure, I think these are phenomenal opportunities, and many times we work with many clients, and we pretty much say, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste, because this is something that's a moment in time that can really propel us, because crises have been here for so many eons. And really, what a crisis is a change in a very, just in a much more rapid manner. So it actually accelerates the change, because change is happening. Sometimes it goes slow, but the crisis just accelerates a number of things. And it's also a call for us to deal with some things that haven't been dealt with before. So the problems that haven't been solved before end up in a crisis mode, similar to our health situation. You end up in an emergency room typically if you haven't taken care of some certain parts. Now, you can have accidents too, for sure. But many a time you go into crisis mode when there's been a long period of neglect. So this is just, a little crying baby saying, hey, time to wake up, need some help, let's go do something. So compassion to me, again, just to come back to that loop, it's almost like a worm on the hook when you go fishing to help you get in. So to try and find a way into this place where I think we're moving more from the thinking to feeling and more intuitive kind of ways of looking at the world of management, leadership, and those 9 yards. And quite frankly, and I think since this is the Heartfulness community, it's really a pathway to love. And the big opportunity is, how do you make love and work and business and other things, coexist? And it's not. I think what we're coming to realize now is they're not separate. It's almost, if they don't coexist, you don't have any way to move forward on. Because very often they used to be, when I was growing up, business is business and personal is personal, and the two shall not meet. And people would go from home to work, and there's all this business of work-life balance. Well, COVID has thrown that out in 5 seconds. Go figure out where your day starts and where your day ends. Mm-hmm. So I think these are all great opportunities to go and learn something. And so that's my thing with compassion. Compassion is this little hook to figure out, but I think the journey is just starting. And there's a lot more to be learned.
So much of what you're saying, Sunil, reminds me that the number one way that a true leader is effective is being able to see the people that they're trying to lead. So if it's in the corporate world, or again amongst, like, even if it's a coach, right? A coach of a team, if you see each of the individual players and truly see them, that's how they feel the compassion, the love, the understanding, and one of the heartful ways to be a really effective leader. So there's something, even to go back to Cuomo, right? There's something in the way that he speaks to the crowd, and the crowd is a global audience, by saying, I see you, we're doing this for you. You're in charge of your own destiny here in order to help make the rest of the world better. So let's figure out a way that you play an important integral role. In many of the leadership roles that I've had at various organizations, the most effective thing for me has always been knowing everyone's name, knowing where they come from, figuring out like what it is that is the biggest part of their job, even if their job is just stocking the refrigerator for the rest of the team. It's figuring out, how do I let you know that I see you and I honor that. And as you're talking about Medellin and everywhere else, it doesn't matter if you're a drug lord or if you're actually working at a Fortune 500 company. Paul Pullman used to run Unilever, and he would do the most incredible job of always knowing, like, the entire set. There was like hundreds of thousands of people. He couldn't know every single person, but man, was he amazing at remembering people's names and coming in and being like, all right, Bob, you're doing that. So great to see you, Sally. I'm glad this is happening. And I think even amongst any kind of nefarious or not kind of role, if you come in and you say to your team or to your family members, you know what, I see you, tell me how it's going, tell me how we can make this better, how can we be more effective in what we're doing, and you can contribute, I think that's one of the most heartful ways to go. Because as we talk about even Black Lives Matter, right, the biggest part of Black Lives Matter is people making sure that you can acknowledge white privilege or your stance in the world to say, actually, I'm so sorry, I didn't know before, but now I'm conscious of, I need to be more conscious to just listen and hear you. Tell me what your story is, tell me how that made you feel, and tell me what you think is the way forward. Because we can come to any type of agreement on any, whether, in America right now, there's so much divisiveness. I've spent the weekend with my family and a couple of different aunts and uncles, and we are totally polarized on our political views, but we are sitting around a table making sure that we're listening and actually having the tough conversations as a means to getting to what could possibly be a path forward. And that is a lot about what leadership is being able to take the time, the heartfulness approach and go, just tell me what you want to say. Tell me what's going on. So for me, every time actually I hear Sunil speak, I think of that, because you've got that great story about your family council and things of that nature. And it's about listening. So much of leadership is actually listening. But yeah.
So it's interesting. So sorry,
Yeah.
Halli, you were saying something? Sorry, Halli, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say a lot of this is so ringing true again with experiences from my life. And I think an important way to make people understand that you really care about them is that active listening. It takes a second to bring yourself back down to a level and say, I'm going to sit here, put my attention on you for a minute and take in everything that you're saying. It's not just listening to respond, but listening to internalize. And leaders have to do that to understand, how to connect with people and how to go about their lives. And I think something that both of you touched on is this understanding that everybody can be a leader. Leadership is not just for people in places of power, CEOs of companies. Everybody can be a leader in their daily lives, whether or not it's with their family or with their friends. Again, in times like this, it's important to act as a leader in those small groups. And so I wanted to ask you guys what you would say to those people who aren't necessarily in places of power, but still want to make an impact in the arenas that they are in, and how to be a heartful leader like that.
Actually, that's a beautiful segue into what I was going to. I think let's go back to the definition of leadership. Leadership is not a right or a title or an entitlement for that matter. Many times people say, if you're the big boss, you're the leader, that's true. But I think leadership is more resilient if it's distributed. If you have many people who can perform the leadership function, because so what is leadership? Leadership is trying to integrate people around a particular common objective, and then you go for it. And it doesn't have to be, just the domain of the people at the top or so-called wise ones. In fact, by and large, there's a lot of blindness that happens. And one of the best visual examples I can give you is the Blue Angels. The Blue Angels are these Navy flight demonstration team. They fly these jets, the F-18s, and it's a phenomenal thing. And I watched them, and we as a family would go watch them and grew up with some of their principles. Now, this is an all-volunteer team. They're in the Navy and the Marines, but they come and they fly together as volunteers. And the selection process is very unique. So when people apply to come into this team, there has to be a unanimous acceptance by all the people that are accepting the new pilots on. And not only the pilots, even the ground staff. And every 2 years they change over completely. When they're flying, there's 4 jets that fly, and there's again 1, 2, 3, 4, and the number 1 jet is called the boss, and he's the senior most pilot. And the number 4 jet is the junior most pilot. So when they're flying straight up, the boss, and you can listen to their commands, and the boss is giving the commands and showing them how to go. But when they fly upside down, the command shifts from the number 1 to the number 4. So the number 4 pilot, who's the junior most pilot, now fortunately they've also accepted women. Women are now part of the team. So when they're flying upside down, the boss moves from number 1 to number 4. So this is exactly how leadership has to adapt, because things are changing so fast. You can't rely just on one level to understand. And again, staying with this analogy of again, it's a true story that Dr. Jesus was. He is one of my mentors and part of the founder of the institute we have. So he was in Israel and watching this general who had the screen, and they could see the entire territories around Israel because they're always under attack. So, and the general could basically see, where things are popping up from enemy zones. So this one person who was now the general was showing Dr. Reeses proudly, this big board of, where things are. And this Syrian MiG, flew up and crossed into Israeli territory. And he scrambled and he went after this MiG. And then the MiG understood this guy was coming from, he turned around and went back. Now the general sitting in the war room told this pilot to disengage. So this guy's gone back, disengage. But he didn't disengage. He went after him and then actually shot the plane down. The other pilot escaped because they parachuted out. And the Dr. Dees asked him, man, you disobeyed the general's order, and did you get court-martialed or what? He says, no, I got promoted. Because in the Israeli Air Force, the command shifts because you're just watching a screen, you don't know what's going on. This guy is in the field, and knowing how to delegate and knowing how to shift that is a critical part of leadership. Now, had there been an international incident, had he made a mess, he says, I knew it was my responsibility to make sure this thing happened correctly. And so that's an example of, you can see leadership examples all over the place, and it doesn't have to be military. But my father just sent me a video of Patch Adams. There was this thing, I don't know if you've seen that movie, but he was a bit of a rebel, and he became a student and was taking on the medical profession to say, hey, you guys are just going at it the wrong way. So that's an example, because he had all these high doctors, but this guy was changing the system. Katherine, over to you.
Yeah, which is so important for this particular group, right? When you look at Gen Z, which many of you in the audience are, you guys are just phenomenal at not taking rank as a means of leadership, right? So whether we're talking about Greta or the large group of formerly student but still student activists in America who are suing America for crimes against their generation on climate change, whether we're talking about Black Lives Matter or we're talking about any multitude of mass group organizational leadership that's happening within the generation that is right now at the forefront of all things. There is really something beautiful to be said about how that works. And I have a line that I created for one of my old companies, and it says that leadership is like the moon. It drives the tide. And right now, the tide of change is happening all over the world, and in sort of this unified voice that kind of comes from your generation, truly. And so it's amazing to me watching this experience, because as Sunil said, it doesn't have to be that you're necessarily the boss or you're the person in the point of authority to be the person that leads us on what's the way forward. And I really put it back to all of you to think about, like, how are you doing that? And it can be on a very small scale. Your leadership might be in a party of 2 or 3, right? I mean, it might just be your household or your roommates. You've decided to be the person that leads the charge on who cleans the house better and makes things more efficient. Who's going to be the person that ensures that we don't have a pile up of garbage today? And that garbage could be big or small, because when we are talking about things like climate change, who's taking out the trash is really a bigger metaphor for things. And sometimes having the awareness of yourself and knowing your mindfulness and then your heartfulness, why are we taking this approach, is what's the most important thing. So as you've gone through the last 3 days, figuring out ways to become more centered, understanding everything from, like, how do you stand with your posture with your feet on the ground, to how do you actually get yourself wrapped around some of the bigger, like, heart, mind, body experiences. Once you have, another one of my lines I love to talk about, when you're on an airplane, there's a reason they tell you to put the oxygen mask on you before helping others. Once you've actually put that oxygen mask on you and you've filled yourself up and you say, okay, I know where I need to be, I know where I feel centered, here's how I'm going to help my family, my community, the world, how I'm going to lead today by example. And all of those things really come back to a sort of heartful, compassionate approach to what it is you want from life, what it is you want from others. Sunil was talking about how now, I mean, for most of you, I'm sure you're FaceTiming with your friends and WhatsApp videoing them all the time. And it's not anything new because of COVID, but now that we have entered this new playing field where working from home is probably going to be the norm, there is this different relationship to work and family and life. I have a 5-month-old baby. It's my new role that I'm playing. And the two of them have met Rosalie so many times because it's almost impossible for her to not join me on these Zoom calls. She's up for a walk with her dad today, so you probably won't get to see her, but she is so integrated into everything that is my work experience because it's impossible not to. And if work and life at home have now kind of melded into this shared experience, it may change the way we work and the way we act as leaders. How are you going to tell a subordinate in your job not to do something or do something when you yourself are standing there trying to like take care of your kids? and so that's another interesting heartful leadership example, because whether you are, you know, going out there and starting an activist experience on climate change or Black Lives Matter, or you're starting a board meeting, you really are thinking about, how does this affect me? How does this affect my family? How does it affect my community? How does it affect the whole world? And that's actually a really big part of why this compassionate, heartful leadership is something that has to almost become a part of our daily existence. I don't know, Halli, do you have any more on that of what we've been talking about, or?
No, absolutely. No, it's so wonderful again to look at my generation and like what you said, to understand that we all are taking it upon ourselves to be those leaders and to actively create change. Sorry, my dog, you may hear him in the back, but to create change in our everyday lives. And it's been so heartening to see that, no, it doesn't matter who you are. Everybody understands that it takes the one step in your life to do that. And even though that step may be small, it may be talking to your family about what's going on in the news. It could be talking to your friends about what's going on in the news. It's those small bits that really do make the difference. But yeah, I have some questions from the audience that I've been scanning. If you guys would like to start on those, does that sound good? Okay.
Absolutely.
One that I think is pretty related to what we've been talking about says this: we all talk about being leaders, but we need worker bees to correct. Is my assumption wrong? Should everyone be a leader? And how do you strike a balance between leading and following? And I think that's really interesting to hear from your guys' perspective.
Sunil.
So let me tackle that one. So let's talk about, I think there's a confusion between what leadership is and the word management, because the words have actually changed. Because if you look at the history of the word, so it started off with this guy, Taylor, the scientific management. How do you divide work up into little chunks so you can, you make humans into machines, and they just, basically just do their little thing, and you make them specialize on certain things. So it was basically, if you look at the first school of management, was the Graduate School of Business Administration. It was more of an administrative kind of thing. And then there was this thing which says administration is just a piece of the action; it's not the whole action. And then it moved into management shifted from administration to management. And then if you look at management, the word management, the French, by the way, who are very proud of their language, don't have a French word for management. They use the English word. In Spanish, the word manejar only refers to when you drive something, like drivers, or if you handle horses. It's not dealt with, handling people. So many times certain languages don't have this word. So if you start thinking about this, the management is just a human construction that we've created. Now, as we're seeing this thing evolve, and basically said, then later on they found out, management is just for middle managers. We don't, what we need is a more amplified thing. Let's call it executives. So it went from administration to management to executive. And then, that CEO word came along. And but it's the same phenomenon with, with different words. And then, in the 70s, 80s, the word executive wasn't doing too well. So the word leadership came along. Let's amplify it with something else. But fundamentally, the paradigm hasn't shifted. So if you look at the word management, administration, leadership, or executive, they've all personalized the function of management. And as time has gone by, actually management has become very inefficient. There's a lot of layers that come into play. Because I don't need to be managed. At the end of the day, if I can be self-motivated, if I have personal accountability, you can do away with a bunch of layers in the system. And I think that's what the world is actually calling for, especially now. So the worker bees, absolutely, because sometimes, so right now I may have a certain role in my organization, but in my home, my station is the dishwashing unit, because by the way, in Mexico, we don't have dishwashers. Like in America, we actually wash by hand. Now in the kitchen, my wife is the boss. She's the boss of the kitchen, but I am the boss of the dishwasher section, in the kitchen. So it doesn't make a difference. So this whole concept of, who's doing work, because sometimes, and you think there's got to be worker bees, but very often the purpose of leadership is to get the heck out of the way and make sure they enable the system, or they create the system for the most desirable to naturally occur. And I don't need people, beating me up and say, are you doing your work, not doing your work? And by the way, there's so many other hang-ups that exist in the structures. You think of a factory that's, you go in, the first thing you do, you clock in, you go through this metal bars of detection and they check, what you're taking in and if you're coming out, so you go through security. So what do they tell you? I don't trust you to do your work. You better come on time. I don't trust you to be honest. So you're basically going into a prison. And I don't think the world is essentially looking for that kind of a structure. And I think part of the thing that's evolving is the level of people want freedom, people want, and if you can imagine self-accountability, that's the best kind of accountability there is. But very often we impose ourselves through old habits. But I think that's part of the shift that we're slowly seeing, ready, waiting to happen. So worker bees, yes, are necessary, but that's not the domain of leadership only. So sometimes if I have to carry, in fact, my associates, they're doing some good work, and I'm saying, I'm here to carry your bags. There's nothing wrong with that. As long as we can get the ego out of the way, which ties back to this heartfulness. And that's the classic ego busting system, if I can call it that. Katherine, I know you've got something to say too.
I mean, for sure, I'd love to add quite a few things to this. It was perfectly framed that there's a couple of ways that we could approach this concept, right? Because one, I pray really that the current corporate structure is shifted a little. There are some companies that do some very fascinating things where no matter what your role is that you're hired for, you actually have to spend some time in every single department, whether you are actually in the janitorial room or you're, actually the CEO, in order to understand the importance of every person's job. And then the other thing to that is that for me personally, early in my career, I spent a long time working as an executive assistant and always being the most junior person in the room, which then led me to like a chief of staff role, then to more of an advisory role before becoming an executive myself in many departments. And what I have found is there were a lot of times earlier on in my career where I managed up. So the leadership of me as an executive assistant or as somebody who was trying to work from the bottom to get the leaders to do things, which we would think, or the management to do something, came from the leadership at the bottom end, and that of this pyramid that really doesn't have to work that way. I mean, so I worked at the World Economic Forum, which is the Davos folks and all of that. And my first role there, which is kind of nutty and but sort of wildly wonderful. My first job there was sort of on a whim. I was in between things, got married, and I was about to transition where I was living, and I took a temp job as the dishwasher. Now, I have an honors degree in business management. I went to medical school at Columbia University, and they were like, why in the world are we going to take you to like organize the closets and unload the dishwasher? And I was just like, because I'm going to be here and I'm going to help you and it's going to be wonderful. And I really had to convince them to hire me to do this job. And I did that job. And, 3 weeks later, then they put me on another team and another team, and another team. But it's the greatest opportunity I think I've ever had, because I then several years later was sent to help open their California office. And in doing so, my operations people who did unload the dishwasher, I was like, I've had your job and it's great. So you got to tell me what we need to make this place run. I can't do it unless you lead me on how we get it done, because you know better than anybody else how this is going to work. So it's not so much worker bees as it is we are all worker bees, right? I mean, if the structure is that someone is the queen, I guess that's okay. But that queen doesn't ever actually leave, doesn't make the hive work, doesn't operate all of it. Like, every person's job is really important, and they can be a leader in just how they appreciate their job, how they take pride in what they're doing, and appreciate the people that they're working with. Leadership doesn't have to only be rank. And so if we can change the corporate structure even more so that way, which many like Silicon Valley jobs in different places, autonomy is key, is a lot of what Sunil was saying, right? If I trust you that you're going to go do your job, you can work from home, you can work in a swing over there while the other guy is, at Google and place like that. It's like, it's kind of like you're at Disneyland, that's like, go do whatever you want. You can, eat lunch upside down and use a pogo stick, and then you're going to produce some of the greatest work ever for me. And it really doesn't matter what your job is and what your rank is. It's really just about you taking your task and wax on, wax off, and really getting into what it is that you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, you shouldn't think of it like worker bees per se. You should think of it like, I take pride in what I do, whatever that is.
And I think so maybe some people would be, and I get asked this question a lot, okay, this is great for people who are in the high-tech world, but what if we're in manufacturing and they have to come to work on the line and be there present, otherwise everything stops. And I think it applies in that context too, because you can still, but I have a client, and by the way, they have a video that's been made, a case study. It's a forging company. Forging is it's a pretty dirty industry. It's like blacksmiths, but it's a high-tech blacksmith. And these guys, it's called Frisa. Frisa is the name of the company, and it's a 30-minute video that shows their story. But these workers, when they come to work like little kids. They come to work with a level of excitement. There's a sense of anticipation. And one of the core values they have, in terms of how they treat each other, everything we're talking about, how to listen, how to argue. In fact, the worker can, talk up to the boss and say, you're wrong because of this, because I see these other things. So this culture of mutual trust and respect, where basically respect means I'm talking to you because we are going to have a disagreement and we're going to learn from each other and we make it better. And when they ship the product, now they ship these big rings, it's all steel and it's metal, and they're beating metal into different shapes. But when they ship the product, they have a term called producto con angel. So product with angel wings. So they actually ship the product to wherever it's going to go. It's going to go to some oil well or oil rig, or it's going to go in a windmill or go in a jet engine. But they ship it with a blessing and love. So you can see how love can actually come in. So it's not compassion only about the people, but also respecting your machine, respecting your workplace, keeping it clean. And one of the ways they sell, when clients come to their organization, we'll go through they actually take them through the restrooms of the workers. So they go to the bathrooms, and most of the GE executives and all that, they're shocked. How can this be so clean? This is cleaner than a 5-star hotel? So just that sense of the environment, and people take so much pride, and people want to come to work there. And it's not about, and sure, if they have other things to do, but it's a question of self-organizing. And if you can somehow create this self-management structures, they actually work much better than having somebody, bossing you around and telling you when to show up and not to show up. So there's examples, and this is not something that happened yesterday. It happened in the late 90s. So it's not something that we have to even dream about. It can easily be accomplished. Sorry, Halli, I don't know if you have some other questions popping up.
No, for sure. And just adding on to a little bit of what you guys are talking about, Katherine, when you mentioned this pyramid type scheme, my education as a leader was always about servant leadership. And whenever I am talking about leadership, I'll always bring this up because it's the most important thing to me about how when you think of the corporate scheme, that you have a small bit of leaders at the top of the pyramid and then it goes lower. The idea in servant leadership is to flip that pyramid, and that the leaders are at the base supporting everybody else. And I think it's important to understand that every one of us can be that person, and taking pride in what you do, whether or not it's so small as cleaning the bathrooms, is something that can make that small impact that can then support the whole. And so truly I think this all heartful leadership, servant leadership, they really do connect in the way you guys are talking about. But for our last 10-ish minutes, I was gonna, and we kind of mentioned it a little bit earlier, but the question is, what if people higher up in your organization do not care to hear from people at every level? How can someone in the middle of the food chain decide to implement heartful leadership and then impact others on?
Do you want to go first?
Sure. So the good news is, so here's the trick that I've learned. By the way, if you think of the heart, I'm going to be a little bit controversial here because, so I was actually thinking about, I was flying back from here, from Monterey. I was living in California, and on the flight back about 8 years ago, I was wondering, when people pass away, when when all is said and done, very rarely in the funeral or the obituary, they say, thank goodness this guy's gone, the world's a better place now without this person. By and large, most people say, this person came, they did their best, they tried to do whatever they could. And then we wish them well on the next adventure. So the question is, if everybody is trying to do good, regardless of how they behave, but if everybody's trying to do the best they can, how come the world is so messed up? And the aha that came was basically everybody's got their own thing, but when we come together, there's all this friction that we create, and there's this rubbing around, and then we try to, many times I've seen so many non-profit organizations or socially conscious organizations that are doing good work, but they are canceling each other's work out. And for example, here in Monterey, there are 3 different organizations that are trying to strengthen the non-profit sector, for instance. And if they just combine forces, which fortunately they're doing right now. So if they just combine forces, they could actually be much more effective rather than having, my brand of this or my brand of that. So the trick is, so the question is, how do you remove the friction? So if you think of this friction, and Halli, I know you're in the mechanical engineering space, so that's back to physics. There's 3 things to do when to reduce friction is, first of all, you remove the unwanted parts, take out stuff. Don't have extra stuff floating around. That's what Elon Musk did, right, with the electric car. Just remove all the extra, you go direct from the engine straight to the wheels. The second is streamlining. You actually streamline things, and that allows things to flow. And the third thing is lubricate. So a lot of times lubrication, communication, but I would say many times communication is actually overrated because people are talking, but there's no connect. And so I'm of the opinion that at least 95% of communication is pretty useless. So if it's not being effective, why are we even communicating? That's as an example. So back to the story of, suppose you're being blocked. Now, one of the things I've learned from the Heartfulness experience is that you can actually communicate without even talking. So there's and many spiritual systems talk about communion. So very, very often you're trying to tell your kids what to do, and there's always this fight that comes in. But over time, we tried this practice where we just heartfully suggest something, and suddenly the kid changes their behavior. So you can actually create change if your own system is somewhat clean. So there's a powerful tool there that can be activated, and that's an example of maybe working with these forces. On the other hand, I believe sometimes friction is very useful because they put a constraint on you. So an example would be brakes. In the car you have brakes. And I keep asking people, what is the main purpose of brakes in the car? So I don't want to put you on the spot, Halli, but why do you think we have brakes in cars?
To keep us safe in a way, just so your momentum doesn't keep going.
So, right, so yeah, you're onto something. Most people say, to be able to stop the car and to keep us safe. But that would be the common answer. But if you imagine what would happen to a car, how would you drive if you didn't have brakes?
You wouldn't be able to. That's yeah.
You drive super slow. So basically, brakes make us go faster.
Yeah.
So we can accelerate because we have brakes. So sometimes we think of, And we sometimes don't realize that this person who's blocking us actually is doing us a real favor. So sometimes we actually are not aware. And I've seen so many instances where I've actually stopped many things. People say, this is good. And I've been the person blocking it, but that forces them to think outside the box and live within that constraint. So these are, simple ways of, and sometimes, if you can't live with that environment, then go find another assignment or another adventure, because you're not tied to that organization.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the main thing I would say is don't give up too early, because sometimes you might be learning a life lesson by that constraint.
Yeah.
Katherine.
Yeah. To echo what you just said, again, we're kind of continuing the same mantra over and over again, right? So you have to lead by example, and you have to start with yourself. And so if you're middle management and you have a team underneath you, but you also have a team of bosses on the higher ranks of you, and you can't necessarily get what the lower ranks want for the higher ranks, and there's a little bit of a divide. What you do is you start by leading from example, and it can be similar in corporate structure, or even again when we talked about like being at your home, right? So how do you teach your children? How do you teach your team a way to do things in a loving, compassionate, effective manner, that they feel that they are actually being respected? And even if you are in a scenario where you're not getting that kind of love affair from your leadership that you feel like you deserve, you start by showing it in other ways. And you might not be able to tell your government exactly what you want or control it, but if you start within your household on how to be better and how to help enact legislation and change, whether it's in any of these different parameters, that's a part of that leadership that we're talking about, the heartful leadership, right? I mean, you have to find within you what it is that you aspire, and then you actually activate it by being that example of it. And it's really amazing how much like putting your mindfulness towards something does just unlock the keys to this. And it's really pretty impressive. So like if you are in a situation and it's really, really bad, yeah, start looking for a new job. But when you look for that new job or you start that new company, you're going to do it in a way that creates the beautiful leadership that you wanted in the first place. And sometimes that is the leadership, right? You say like, I see another path, let me go there. And there, I can't even tell you how many times both myself and others have left organizations with their former boss because of exactly that situation. And they just go to the next place with them. So I think we're wrapped on time, but heartful leadership begins with you. The compassion is inside you. So, yay.
Sunil, do you have any last comment?
Yeah, just as Katherine was talking, I was reminded of the last maybe 5 years. I've had this conversation with many middle managers, CEOs, executives, but 90% of them, they basically, when we talk, they chose to stay in their current role because the message was, if I go do something else, there's a lesson I need to learn here. And this is a gift that I've gotten. And if they go somewhere else, they're going to make the same mistake. So may as well, don't go from the frying pan into the fire, because it may seem hot, it may seem uncomfortable, but that constraint, it looks like a pearl. A pearl is born out of an irritation. So a grain of sand goes in, and so there's a pearl waiting to be born. And if you can be resilient, then off we go. I think it's time. It's so good to be with you all.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
Thank you so much to all three of you. Such an insightful conversation. I really enjoyed it. So interesting to think about leadership and all these different levels and how we can kind of bring the heart to leadership. And you gave amazing examples of these. So thanks a lot for the discussion. It's really rich. Thanks. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. So we're going to have a short break now. And what we'd really like you to do is just to kind of describe day 3 in a word or a phrase, and just to see how you're doing, if you're still with us, and what you're finding you've got out of the day so far. And then after this break, we are going to hear from Camila Hurtado, and she's really going to help us to bring the day together. So we're continuing on the theme of leadership, but what she's going to do is be doing a session on joining the dots to form an action plan for the future. So I think it'll be a really nice session to end with, and to kind of bring a lot of this stuff together. But just to see how you are right now, yeah, if you could do the exercise using the Menti code of 858956, and we'll just see how you're doing. Interesting. So progress, evolve and grow. Great learning experience, inspiring, really enriching. Great, it's fantastic, all of these. A feeling. A jumping point, wow. Inspiring, lots of learnings. Yeah, and definitely on the lots of learnings point, I mean, I found it really amazing. There's so much almost to absorb and take in. I do think it is worth sometimes going back to these, and as I said, they will be available online, so you can just go in and find them on YouTube and have another look as well, which I'm intending to do for some of them. Positive role models, that's really good to hear. Great. Oh, fantastic. Great. Okay, so sounds like everyone's really getting a lot out of this session. So we'll start with the introduction, as I said, of Camila Hurtado, and she's worked as a psychologist, a family therapist, executive coach. She works in leadership development, and she's worked in lots of different cities in Europe. She's originally from Colombia, so she's got experiences of working in lots of different cultures as well. So I'm really looking forward to this session, Camila. Welcome. Thanks a lot for joining us. Oh, I think you're on mute. Yeah.
Okay.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thanks very much, Daniel, for the introduction. And thanks very much, every one of you, for being here and for sharing how this last third day has been for all of you. I was just listening to the last presentation, and it is just so inspiring to, to reflect on what it is to lead with heartfulness. And the last thing that I got from that presentation that really stayed with me is heartful leadership really starts with me, right? And it starts with you, with each one of you. And I am hoping that through the presentation that we are about to embark on, which is going to be about 40 minutes, you're going to have the opportunity to look back at all the things that you've learned throughout these 3 days, every single moment that has inspired you and ignited your curiosity, so that you start becoming a bit more concrete in terms of what is it that you want to take out of this amazing investment of time and effort and energy that you've put into your own personal development since Friday. So I'm going to take you through a journey that is going to share, to do 2 things. So first, I'm going to share a few very, very simple models or ideas of how we human beings work. I'm a psychologist, so I love talking about that. And also I'm going to give you a lot of questions that you might not be able to answer right away, but that you should take with you for the reflection after this day, so that you become more concrete in terms of the actions that you want to take. So let me share my screen, and then we can start. Hold on a second, let me just go back to the beginning. Okay. So here we are. All right. So one of the quotes that I really like, it's a little short quote from a long sentence, but the bit that I really like about it is from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it says, "The step from knowing to doing is rarely taken. And I'd like us to take a moment to reflect that, because after 3 days of being inspired and getting a lot of ideas and insights of what we could start doing, how we could start doing things differently, we very often believe that knowing and understanding is enough for having learned something. But actually, it's only the moment that you take action that makes a difference. So it's only the moment that you move from knowing, from understanding, to doing, to actually behaving differently, to actually integrating new habits into the way you live your life. That is the moment where learning really takes place. So I'm hoping that this session that we're going to get through together will help you to move from knowing to doing, so that you really take action. So perhaps you're familiar with this idea of the competence model, suggested firstly by Stephen Covey. I like to learn it a learning curve, to name it a learning curve. And this is a curve that we all go through whenever we learn something new. And I think it's useful to just remind ourselves of what the process of learning is about, how we start, where we start, the moments and the different phases that we go through, and how can we go through those phases, what is helpful going through those phases. So we start being unconscious, incompetent, so we don't know what we don't know. And then something happens and we become conscious, become aware of our incompetence. So all of a sudden, we didn't know, we lived in the bliss of ignorance, and now we know that we are incompetent. And we want to get out of there. So we start doing something to become more competent until we become so good at it that it is just a habit. So let me just explain this with an example that most of us can connect with. So say you want to learn how to drive or how to ride a bike, but let's just stick with the driving a car. Before you ever decided to learn how to drive a car, you've sat in a car 100 times before, and you didn't even wonder how that worked or what was necessary for you to be able to drive it, right? It wasn't relevant, it wasn't important, you didn't know the mechanics about driving, so you were unconsciously incompetent. You didn't know how to drive, but you didn't know anything about it. It was fine, it didn't disturb you at all, right? However, you decide that you want to drive because now you get a job that is far away from where you live, and there's no real good connection in public transportation. So the best way to get to your job and do your commuting in a decent time is to drive. So you decide you want to drive. And all of a sudden you go to a driving school and start learning all the theory about driving and all the practice. You take a lot of practice lessons, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, this is really complicated, right? So you sit in the car and you learn all the things all the steps that you need to learn to do to be able to drive your car. And it sort of hits you how incompetent you are, right? So you become aware of this incompetence. And you want to get out of that. So you start practicing and driving and learning and driving. And at the beginning, the first time you want to start the car, it sort of feels very unnatural. And the first couple of times, and all of a sudden it starts feeling better and easier. But you're still very much aware of how to start the car and what to do first and how to, press the gas and then brake and not press it too much. And if you still have gears, it's a lot of things going on at the same time. So it's a very conscious process, right? But the more you do it and do it and do it, the more it becomes part of a habit, right? So you don't really realize anymore all the steps that you need to take to be able to drive your car. Until all of a sudden, you are competent, you're a competent driver. And you do that so competently that it is an unconscious skill that you have. It's autopilot. You just do it without noticing. You all of a sudden drive to work, get out of the car and think, oh, I don't even remember having driven, right? Because you were listening to music or talking on the phone or doing all kinds of other things besides driving. And we sort of forget where we started off, right? But that is a process that we go through every time we learn something. We don't know what we don't know. And then something happens. Perhaps we get kicked out of our comfort zone. Perhaps, like it has happened to all of us with this COVID pandemic. And then we realize, oh my God, I didn't know how to use Zoom. And now everyone is meeting on Zoom, for example, or I didn't know whatever it is. And then we become conscious of our incompetence. And we want to get out of that, right? So we want to become competent at something. And we start practicing and practicing and practicing until we become unconsciously competent. So this is how we learn. Very simply described, this is how we become competent at something. So what I want you to do is to start thinking back to Friday, the first session that you attended, and some of you perhaps had the chance to listen to the session that I conducted on growth mindset. So that's when one of you asked me about this idea of self-sabotage. Why do we self-sabotage and how do we avoid that? So we're going to talk a little bit about that. How come we know that we should be doing something different and we still don't do it? So that's an interesting question. I would like you to go back to the first session that you attended throughout these 3 days and start remembering all the things that inspired you. So write all, I would like you to sort of start preparing your brain for action and write down all the things that throughout these 3 days inspired you and ignited your curiosity to learn, to try something out, to improve, to become better at something, to acquire a new skill. And I want you to write down whatever pops up. Everything counts, everything is valid. And try to do that just focusing on whatever pops up without filtering it, without judging it, without editing. So if something comes to your mind that you've perhaps tried before and you didn't do it, and you're going to judge yourself already by, okay, let's not put it on the list. No, don't worry about it. You don't have to commit yet. Just write down whatever pops to your mind, all the things that have inspired you throughout these 3 days. I'm hoping that you took a lot of notes. If you haven't, this is the time. We are going to set goals for yourself, or you're going to set goals for yourself. And research shows that if you write down your goals, you're much more likely to achieve them because you will commit to them, because you will have a point of reference to go back to whenever you don't remember anymore what you wanted to achieve. So write down your goals if you haven't started yet. If you took some notes, then have a look at your notes and write down whatever comes to your mind. It would be great if you can write it down on our Facebook feed or on our YouTube feed so that we start getting an idea of what are the things that inspired you the most and that you think might be something that you want to work with. And because we very often forget very quickly all the things that we wanted to take on, this is just a quick reminder of these 3 days. So you started the 3 days being unconsciously incompetent. For now, you had an idea of what the program was going to be about, but you didn't know how incompetent you were, right? Until you started to explore. And all of a sudden, you explored and you realized that there are things like growth and a fixed mindset. You talked about how to figure out your blind spots. Obviously, you talked a lot about the Heartfulness way. We explored some career paths. We've talked with some artists. And you know that there were a lot of sessions that perhaps led you to understand all of the things that you didn't know. So you became conscious incompetent. And all of a sudden, you realize, well, there's a lot of things that I'd like to do. And then the second day comes and it's about embracing. It's about embracing that conscious incompetence and also talking about uncertainties and how to live through those, how to become more resilient, how to do more of a nonviolent communication, and a lot on team and leadership development. And very important, how to be more self-compassionate with ourselves, self-compassionate. So perhaps you started already thinking of things that you want to practice. Perhaps you want to include a meditation in your routine, in your daily routine. Whatever it is that you started thinking of, those are the things that I'd like you to write down on a piece of paper. All of a sudden, you got to the third day, which is all about evolving. So how do we go beyond our own self and think of our community? Who other people might we impact with our personal development? How can we develop more positive behaviors? What is it about entrepreneurship that is interesting? And obviously, this idea of heartful leadership that I find so inspiring and so touching. So what were the things throughout these 3 days that inspired you and sort of gave you the feeling, yes, that is something that I want to take on? And having done this exercise, we're going to become very, very specific about setting goals and defining an action plan. So I'd like you to have a look at how we can set SMART goals. Perhaps this is something you've come across to before, but setting SMART goals and writing them down is going to increase the chance of you achieving these goals. So S stands for specific. Make it as concrete and specific as possible. Measurable is obviously define a way that you can measure what you want to do. So if we talked about, for example, about physical fitness, right? If I wanted to start eating healthier, then or going to the gym more, then make sure that you say to yourself something as specific as, from this coming week onwards, I'm going to go to the gym for an hour, 3 days a week. So by the end of next week, I will have to be able to measure whether that was what I did or not. Make it achievable, and that means make it as small as it is manageable for you, and as big as it is inspiring and gives you sort of energy to work towards it. But don't make it too big that it's impossible, right? So if you want to start getting more fit, again, physically, don't decide that you want to run a marathon next month if you've never run before, because that is just not achievable. So make it, pack it in smaller steps. Make it relevant, and that is such an important point. Make sure that this goal is something that is really important to you. And to you and your own purpose, your own reason to be in life, your own values, whatever you stand for. I had this question on Friday. Someone asked me, so what if we want to behave differently, but we have, all of our parents or society or the system around us expecting us to behave the way we have behaved so far. We don't want to do that anymore, but they sort of expect that from us. Well, this is the moment for you to define a goal that is relevant to you, not to the rest of the world, not to your parents, not to your boyfriend or your girlfriend, not to your boss, not to your colleagues, to yourself. This has to be related and aligned with your values and your purpose. And obviously make it time-bound so that you really commit to a specific time and can review progress. So we are going to become more specific about our goals. How do you set a SMART goal? I'd like you to go back to the list of things that inspired and ignited your curiosity. So I hope that you have at least one, if not many things that inspired you throughout these 3 days. You might be tempted to take on 10 of those things. And I would advise you against doing that. Because if you do that, you cannot concentrate and you will most probably end up not knowing when to start and nothing is going to happen. So my encouragement would be for you to take 1 or 2 things maximum to start with. And make sure that you take those 1 or 2 things all the way to the level of unconscious competence so that they become part of your habits. And then you take another thing. So focus on a few things, make them part of your new positive behaviors, and only then take a new goal for yourself. So how do we do this? Having a look at all of a lot of the things that inspired you, ask yourself first, where would you see the biggest gain? Where would you see the biggest benefit if you did what? One goal, one or maximum two things. Where would you see you and your life see the biggest gain? And the second question is, where would you feel the biggest pain if you didn't change that? So perhaps you've known already a while that that's something that you want to work on, but somehow you've managed not to take any action. Where would you feel the biggest pain if you didn't take that as an action? So I'm hoping that you are going to be able to choose one or two things, one for the gain, one for the pain, or at least one for each of them. And I'd like you to focus on the first one that you think is most relevant, okay? And for that one, we're gonna go through these 3 or 4 questions, and the idea is that you do the same for the other topic. Now, I'm aware that we might be going quite quickly through these questions, and you might not be able to set a SMART goal in a matter of a minute or two. That's totally fine. But I want to take you through the questions so that you take a bit more time after we end the day today. And I would advise you not to leave it until next weekend, because then you will have forgotten a lot of the things that you really wanted to do. So make sure that you take some time at the end of the day today to make these as concrete as possible if you don't manage in the time that we have together. So now you have one thing that you want to focus on, the most important one for you. So write down, what is it that you want to achieve regarding this topic that you've chosen, and make it SMART, make it specific, measurable, attainable, relevant. Why? Why do you want to achieve this goal? That's the relevant bit. Why? Your big why. And time bound. Okay. If you cannot describe it very nicely and smartly yet, it doesn't matter, but just write it. What is it that you want to do? And I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to put that down on paper, because if you've never gone through the process of setting a SMART goal, it might not be that easy. And I'm happy to answer some questions by the end of the session if we still have some time. So say, for example, you say, again, I'm going to stay with the physical fitness because that is something that we can all relate to. It's sort of a simple example to share. So say, I'm going to share one of myself. So I just had a baby 2 months ago. So, and I feel that I have some backache, and I haven't done any sports in the last 6 months. And I feel that I should, start becoming fitter. So my goal, I could say something like, I want to start doing Pilates twice a week again, starting this week. And I'm going to do that for half an hour each, because I know that an hour is a bit too difficult. So I'm going to do half hour twice a week of Pilates, which is what I used to do before. Now, the second question is, what is stopping you from doing that already? And that is a great question to ask yourself. If you ask yourself, how come I self-sabotage and I don't want to do that anymore? Well, what is stopping you from doing that already? What is stopping me from doing Pilates twice a week already? And when you ask this question, it's very easy to blame others. Oh, well, my partner doesn't let me, or I have too much work. My boss gave me too much work, or it was raining, so I couldn't go out jogging, whatever it is. We're experts in finding excuses for us not to take responsibility for what's good for us. Interesting enough. So my advice when you answer that question is to make sure that you stay, and again, coming back to Stephen Covey, stay in your circle of influence. Stay in those things that you can actually influence and control. not the weather, right? Because you cannot control that or influence at all. What is it that you can influence for sure? What is stopping you from doing that already? And to be honest, once you start asking yourself that question, you very often, if not always, realize that the only thing that is in your way from you achieving something is you. So the only thing that's stopping me from doing Pilates twice a week is laziness, is I haven't organized myself, I haven't put it in a routine, whatever it is, it's myself, nobody else. So what is stopping you from doing that already, that thing that you want to do? Now, the third question goes back to my first presentation on growth mindset. Rather than focusing on the end result already, I'd like you to start thinking on how will you notice you're making progress? So how will you notice that you're slowly getting closer to your goal? Perhaps you haven't achieved it all, right? So if my goal is to, lose 8 kilos that I still have after my pregnancy, perhaps I don't focus after a week whether I've lost 8 kilos, right? So I start within a couple of weeks, I want to lose 1 kilo. So what is the progress that I am making towards my goal? And obviously, how will you know that you have achieved your goal? So how does this end result look like? So that you sort of have a very clear vision of what you're striving towards. Now, what I find very, very useful, and that again helps us against self-sabotaging, is if we manage to engage someone that will help us in our learning. So that's what the last question is about. Well, I can see that it's not there in that question yet. So it's going to be the last question. But how can you engage someone that will remind you that you wanted to go out running twice a week? Or how can you engage someone that is loving you and that you trust, that is going to be able to challenge you and remind you that actually you wanted to wake up 20 minutes earlier every day to start meditation? So who can you engage that is going to be what I call an accountability partner? And that is really, really helpful for you to make some progress quicker, because you feel that you have someone who's going to remind you to be committed to yourself. So what are the first 1 or 2 or 3 small steps that you want to take to achieve your goal? Again, make the steps very, very small, package them small so that you are then able to achieve this goal. Don't decide to run a marathon in a week if you've never run before. Okay, so how do we know whether you're going to do it or not? Well, it's important to see what motivates us to ask. And if we simplify human motivation, there are 2 things that take us to action: avoiding pain or seeking pleasure. Now, if I want to avoid pain, that works really hard, right? So if I put my hand on a hot stove, I don't have to think very long before I take it away very quickly because I want to avoid the pain. The only problem with acting to avoid the pain is that it only works in the short term. I cannot do something just to avoid the pain for a very long time. Now, the other thing that helps us move into action is to seek pleasure, to see the carrot at the end of the tunnel, right? To see the light at the end of the tunnel, to see, to have a clear picture of how it looks like and feels like to be fit again, to have eaten healthy and have gone to the gym and whatever it is in a couple of weeks' time. So that one takes a bit longer to work, but it lasts in the long run. So I'd like you to ask yourself, how do you, where is your motivation at the moment? And is this goal that you want to take on for you to avoid pain? And if that's the case, I'm sure you're going to take action quickly, but how can you turn it into something pleasurable in the future? And if this is a game that you see for yourself, then how do you make sure that you start getting into action as quickly as possible And once you get there, I'm sure it's going to last in the long term. So the last question that I'd like, or the last exercise that I'd like you to do with your own goal is to ask yourself, how committed are you to perform that goal? So on a scale from 1 to 10, how confident are you that you will achieve it? Now, 1 means, you know I should perhaps maybe try, which means you're not going to do it, right? Maybe, perhaps, and try, you're not going to even do it. It's 1. And 10 will be nothing. Nothing will stop me from doing it. So from tomorrow on, or from tonight on, I'm just going to listen more carefully. Or from tonight on or tomorrow on, I'm going to lead my team differently. Whatever it is that you want to take on, nothing's going to stop you. And that is the 10. Where are you? How confident are you that you're going to achieve your goal? And if you're not there at 10 yet, perhaps you're at 6 or 7, what do you need to move 1 or 2 points up the scale? So what do you need to get your motivation going so that you feel more confident that you're going to achieve that goal? And again, once you have clarified that motivation bit, you can define, okay, what is the first step that you're going to take? And I want you to take a step that you can perform during 21 days. Not for the rest of your life, because again, that sounds a bit sort of impossible. But 21 days has proven to be a good time for you to start to develop a new habit. So what can you start taking for 21 days non-stop so that you start to develop this new habit? And again, going back to my suggestion before, who can you engage in the process? Who could be your accountability partner that can take you throughout these 21 days so that you can achieve your goal? So that is the end for me. What we would like to know from you is, what will be your first action step? And it would be great if you share it in our menti.com. That is the code. And I can assure you, the moment you start typing it and sharing it with this amazing, inspiring community, it will feel a bit more committed. So that's why we want you to share with us what is going to be your first action step. And for that, Daniel, I'm going to probably stop sharing here, right?
Yeah, exactly. And then we, our technical team can then hopefully share. Yeah.
All right, so I'm curious. It's hard. I know it's hard to commit to a first action step, but here we come. Some of you are daring to do that. Excellent. You know, taking an action step means leaving your comfort zone, and that is hard work because we're wired to do what we're used to doing. So our brain is going to stop us from leaving our comfort zone. It's scary to leave our comfort zone. So we need a lot of courage to do it. You need a plan, yes. It's important to understand where you are now, absolutely. That's the first step, great. You need a plan and you need courage to take action. Again, it's not going to be easy. Your brain is going to make sure that you go back to your comfort zone, to all the things that you know, to all the things that you've been doing for so long, and they have proven to be successful so far, sort of successful, right? Perhaps you're in a difficult relationship and you've been there for a while and you know it's not working, and your comfort zone means that you know how it works, so you don't dare to leave it, right? So it's going to be hard to leave that not working relationship, whatever it is, with your boss or with your partner or with your friends, whatever it is. It's going to be hard. I love it. I try to tolerate my physiological discomfort. Yes, I love it. There's a lot of discomfort involved in learning something new. Do it 3 times a week. That's measurable. It's time-bound. Excellent. Yes, visualize a possible outcome. Yes, that is great. That is motivation through seeking pleasure. Excellent. Pause before disagreeing. Yeah, listen, and try to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. More empathy. Excellent. Oh, I love this. I love this. Guys, you are committed. I'm loving this. Get yourself out of old thought loops. Yes. And, you know, your brain is going to bring you back to those. It's going to bring you back to those. So park them, write them down and tell your brain, I hear you. I'm just going to give myself the chance to think something different, to have a different self-talk. Excellent. Improve an existing skill. Excellent. So more practice, practice, practice. Practice makes the master. Yes, I love it. Get as many accountability partners as you want, because having a partner to take you running with them is great, or asking you, so how is it going, the meditation daily? How is it going? And you're like, oh, sorry, I haven't started yet. It really helps to have an accountability partner. Yes. Excellent. Yes, resume contact with friends. That is so important. Focus on your relationships. Invest in your relationships. That is, and there's enough research that shows that people who are happier have positive relationships. So if there's one thing that you want to choose to invest your time and your energy in, is in improving your relationships. Believing in myself. Yes, excellent. Perfect. All right, guys, so we come to the end of the session today. I thank you very, very much for sharing your actions. It is inspiring to see what you're planning to do after these 3 days, and I wish you all the best and an amazing time after this. Daniel, over to you.
Thank you so much, Camila. I really loved that session. I was doing it myself, and I've already got lots of things going on in my head that I'm going to do. And it's so nice, I think, when you absorb so much, to really have a clear plan, like, right, I'm going to do this now. And having your session has given us that space to really, I think, make the most out of all of the things we've received in the last 3 days. So it was perfect. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
So I think now we're just going to give the audience another chance to answer one final question, which is kind of about what they've got out of the 3 days. So we've got one other Menti poll, one last final one for the day, which is, what are your takeaways from the whole session, from the whole 3 days? Because we'd love to know what you've got out of it. I think everyone involved from our side has got a lot out of it. So we just want to know how it's felt for you. And I think in a moment, Yelda is also going to be rejoining us.
I'm here. Yeah, I'm here, Dan.
There you are. Good to see you again, Yelda.
Good to see you, Dan.
So I guess before we get to seeing what people have got out of the entire 3 days, it would be nice to hear from you. What do you think? What are your takeaways from it? What are your reflections of the 3 days? Yelda.
Yeah, sorry. I thought it was related to the Menti poll.
No, I was just asking you. Yeah, first of all,
I didn't participate in all of the 3 days, but I had the session with Tokyo. That was really interesting, and then obviously I had half of today. It was also a lot of interesting stuff from Kambiz and interesting things. Also Pipina, I think she was called, the human rights lawyer.
Yeah,
was some interesting stuff she was working on, and yeah, I don't know. I haven't really thought that much about it. It hasn't crystallized that clearly. What about you, Dan? You got any?
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing that someone's written actually here on the Menti post. I'm cheating a bit because I'm using someone else's great quote here, but there's a thing that kind of the power is in our own hands, so that, you know, the limitation on our growth is just us, right? So all we need to do is to think differently, and then and maybe think about things from a different angle, and have all of this kind of input that we've had, this amazing, inspiring input we've had from all of these speakers from lots of different places. But if we really use that, and we use practices like meditation and movement and so on, then yeah, we can completely overcome the limitations, I think. So yeah, I guess that's what my takeaway has been. What have we got? I've got a few more on the Menti poll now. So the key to tackle any problem is acceptance. That's a really nice one. Sort of, you know, dealing with reality and then moving forward from there. people feeling that they can always grow and learn. That's great. They've got a lot of motivation out of it. Positive change, hope and confidence. Yeah, some really nice things. And I really like this one about, you know, being able to follow my inner voice. I can't quite see the end of that one. To follow my inner voice and to make progress. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's been great to go through these 3 themes, right? We had the explore theme and the embrace theme, and now the evolve theme. And I love that last session because it gives that space to bring it all together. But yeah, all of these sessions are going to be available online afterwards as well if you want to go back and see them as well. Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I don't know if they are still available on Facebook, but I know that you can find day 1, day 2, day 3 on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly.
To rewatch something or you miss something.
Yeah.
I guess you mentioned acceptance. I don't know if I should join in with my own 2 cents, but I think I personally have a very accepting personality, and I accept a lot of things, but it can also there's a key in there, and you should accept the things you can't change, but it should not flow into the things that you can change. And there are a lot of things we shouldn't just accept, you know? So
yeah, definitely.
I think there's really a balance in that, where sometimes if you just accept something, then afterwards you're saying, wait, that wasn't right, something happened there, and I was just accepting that something was wrong, but actually I could have done something and should have done something. Next time I will speak up, or I will, you know.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess what I've noticed with all of the talks is just this kind of this intention to be more conscious and more aware of like our behavior and what's happening in our body and our minds and our thoughts, and, you know, try and bring all of that together so that we can kind of integrate and then move forwards in like one intended direction. Yeah, that's what I felt.
To be able to listen and hear your inner voice, your intuition, and be able to act on that immediately and follow that.
Yeah, and maybe that's what evolving is really about. I don't know.
Yeah.
I think we've also going to have in a moment, I think, there's just going to be a video which shows the kind of making of this conference, just because there's been so many people involved in making it happen. It would just be nice to, now we're getting to the end of it, to show that video so that people can see all of the people that they haven't necessarily seen presenting, but have been involved in the background and doing a lot of the work. So yeah. Can we hit?
Yeah, there's a behind the scenes video, right?
Yeah, exactly. Which I think we're going to see in a minute. Yeah. Here we go.
Everyone.
And here they all are. Hey.
Hi.
Okay, we can have all the videos on wrap. Congratulations.
Hi.
Hi. Well done.
Congratulations.
Well done.
You did this.
Congratulations.
Great job.
Okay, we can have all the videos
You
on
did this.
Congratulations.
Good to see everyone here.
Good job.
Laura.
You did this.
Good job.
Come around. Can I hear drums somewhere? Can I hear drums somewhere?
Yeah, my internet's around 100%. I'm going to leave a time.
Can I hear drums somewhere?
My internet's around 100%. I'm going to leave a time.
So is everybody
Oh, Meadow,
here?
you got your earphones. Meadow, yay! We should have had you on with your headphones.
It's fun, right?
Yeah. The man behind it all.